Hi math students, welcome to today's lesson, which is going to be on multiplication and division word problems. This is the third lesson in our unit 2, which is on multiplication and division. If you have not already watched the lesson on multiplication and the lesson on division, make sure you look at those before you watch this video, because in this video we're going to be using everything we learned about multiplying and dividing to help us look at these word problems, or some people call them story problems. So like we said, our objective for today is we're going to be able to use all that stuff we learned about with multiplication and division to help us answer these word problems. To start off, I want to review some of the things we talked about in those first two lessons, specifically what multiplication and division mean. So in our first lesson, we spent a lot of time talking about multiplication. And one of the things we said in that lesson is that multiplication is this idea of repeated addition. What we mean by repeated addition is if you've got a multiplication problem like 3 times 6, repeated addition means that 3 times 6 is the same idea of adding 3 groups of 6, or adding 6 3 times. So something like 3 times 6 means you're adding 6 plus 6 plus 6, adding 6 3 times, hence repeated addition. Today we're going to be looking at story problems or word problems. So that means if you're reading a story where you would want to add the same number again and again, that's a clue you're going to want to use multiplication. So for example, I've got William wants to give his 3 classmates each 6 pieces of candy. If he's doing that, he's giving the first person 6 pieces, he's giving the second person 6 pieces, the third person 6 pieces. We would want to add 6 3 times. That's a clue that we would want to use multiplication. We would want to say 3 times 6. There's 3 classmates and they're each getting 6 pieces of candy. Now, there can be a similar problem but worded differently, which is going to be what we look at over here. So on this side is a review of what we learned about yesterday in our division lesson. Yesterday we learned that division is this idea of equal sharing. What I mean by equal sharing is something like 18 divided by 3 means you're putting 18 into 3 equal groups. You're sharing 18 equally between 3 circles. So something like Orlando has 18 pieces of candy he wants to share with 3 classmates. He's got these 18 circles, which represent the candy, that he's sharing equally between those 3 people. That would be a division problem to figure out how many pieces of candy should each classmate get. In this problem, we're still talking about candy. We're still talking about 3 classmates, but the difference this time is he has 18 total pieces of candy that he's dividing between his 3 friends. He's sharing equally. Understanding what multiplication and division mean and not just being able to get the answer, but truly understanding what they mean is going to be really important today when we're looking at these word problems, because something you're going to have to be able to do is identify, do you want to use multiplication or do you want to use division? So to help us with that, I've got 3 story problems we're going to look at. We're not going to do any of the math. All I want you to tell me is, would you want to use multiplication or division to answer the question? So for example, just this first one, we've got Aviana buys 4 pizzas and each pizza cost $8. How much was the total cost? Don't actually answer the question. Just tell me, would you want to use multiplication or division? Well, we're trying to find the total. She's got 4 pizzas and each one costs $8. So that first pizza costs $8. That second pizza costs $8. That third pizza costs $8. That fourth pizza costs $8. Because you would just be adding that same number again and again. That is the same thing as multiplication. So this first one, you would want to use multiplication to find the total cost. What about the second one? We've got Hilma works 20 hours this week and makes $480. How much money does she make per hour. Would we want to use multiplication or division? Well, in this problem, we know how much total money she makes in 20 hours, but we don't want to know how much money she makes in 20 hours. We just want to know 1 hour. You would need to use division. You would want to divide her total money by how many total hours she works to figure out how much money she makes for just 1 hour. One last practice one. We've got Samantha divides up her students into 3 groups for a game. Each group has 6 students. How many students are in class? Go ahead, tell me to answer this question. Do we need multiplication or division? This last one I think is the trickiest because it says divides right there, but think through what it's saying. It's saying I've divided students into 3 groups. So we've got 3 groups, maybe at 3 tables, right? And it tells us each group has 6 students. So there's 6 students here, there's 6 students here, 6 students here. The question's asking how many total students there are. I know it says divides here, but if I'm trying to find how many total students, you would want to use multiplication. You could just, based on this picture, say 6 plus 6 plus 6, or you could say there's 3 groups and there's 6 in each group. So we would multiply the number of groups by how many are in each group to find how many total students there are. So that would be multiplication. This is going to give you a good idea of what's coming next. We're going to still have this extra step of figuring out what type of math we want to use, but in these next couple problems, we're also going to actually be doing the math and answering the question. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've got 3 examples we're going to look at. In this first one, we've got Dion, Destiny, and Donald go and buy 72 pencils. If the pencils are equally shared, how many will each person get? Now, if I were a student and reading through this, I like to underline the important information. They told us Dion, Destiny, and Donald are buying 72 pencils. And it's telling us the pencils are equally shared. Our question we're trying to figure out is how many pencils will each person get right there. So what we've got is we've got these 3 people buy all these pencils. They're sharing them, and we're trying to figure out how much Donald got, how much Destiny got, and how much Dion got. Go ahead and try writing an equation to represent this. Well, now that you've tried, let's talk through it some. Some of the things I underlined, I put a box around equally shared. I did that because we've been talking about what multiplication and division mean, and we've been saying division means this idea of equally sharing something, right? So I put that in a box because that's a clue. Our equation needs division. Now, what are they sharing? They're sharing 72 pencils between 3 people. I underlined their names because it didn't tell us 3 people are sharing 72 pencils. That 3 is hiding right there. So for our equation, we want to say they are dividing the 72 pencils between the 3 people. And that is what we're trying to figure out to answer the question, how much will each person get? This right here is the equation we need to write. If you write it the other way, that does not make sense. That says you're dividing the 3 people between the 72 pencils. We're not dividing up the people and giving them to the pencils. It's the other way around. We're dividing the pencils and giving out all the pencils to those 3 people. So they mean different things with division if you change the order. Now that we've got our equation, what's our answer going to be? How many will each person get? Well, in yesterday's lesson, we learned how to do this division. When the numbers get larger like that and we don't automatically know how many 3s go into 72, that's a clue you want to use long division. So I would come and say 72 divided by 3. Well, 3 goes into 7 twice, and there's a remainder of 1. You can just write the remainder 1 if you want and bring down your 2, or you can go ahead and say 2 times 3 is 6, subtract, and see the remainder as 1, and then afterwards bring down your 2. Either way, we're left with a 12 here. We divide again, so we say 3 goes into 12 4 times. There's no remainder, so I can just go ahead and say 0, or you can say 4 times 3 is 12 and subtract to show that the remainder is 0. Either way, when we divide, we get the answer is 24. Well, what is 24? What does that represent here? Well, we were trying to answer the question, how many will each person get? So that 24 means we could say each person gets 24 pencils. So that would be our answer for this question. Moving on, the second example is going to say, Crystal House Schools purchased 9 boxes of pencil for the upcoming school year. Each box contains 62 pencils. How many total pencils did the school purchase? I'm going to go ahead and let you try to write an equation first. All right, well, what's going on here? It's telling us that the school is buying 9 boxes of, I underlined that a little weird. They're buying 9 boxes of pencils, and they tell us each box has 62 pencils. So what do we've got here? We've got 9 boxes. If it helps you, you can draw pictures. But we've got 9 boxes, so we've got a bunch of these boxes, and every single one of them has 62 pencils. So there's 62 here, here, here. All of these boxes have 62 pencils. Our question's asking, how many total pencils did the school purchase? Well, one way you can do it is you can say 62 plus 62 plus 62 plus 62 again and again and again. Or, because I'm adding that same number again and again and again, that's the same thing as multiplication. So I could say we need to multiply those 62 pencils that are in each of these boxes. We need to multiply that by how many total boxes there are, and there are 9 of them. Together, that would give us our question, which is how many total pencils are there? That's what we're trying to figure out. So this is our equation. What are you getting for your answer? Well, I would want to rewrite it like this and stack those numbers so that I can see what I want to multiply. I could start by saying 2 times 9 is 18 and carry my 1. And then 9 times 6, do you know what that is? 9 times 6 is 54, plus that 1 right there gives me 55. And so we're left with our answer. There are 558 total pencils, which I'm a teacher, so I'm going to tell you that would probably last a week. They disappear like crazy. But 558 total pencils would answer the question, how many total pencils did the school purchase? So here's an example of a problem where you'd be using multiplication. There's one last example, which looks like this. Let me clean it up a little bit. Okay. In this problem, it says, after 5 days at the beach, Chantel found 22 seashells and 36 starfish. She decides to split her seashells between herself and her 4 friends. How many seashells will each person get? Are there any extra? Just like before, I'm going to have you go ahead and try to write an equation for this. Well, once again, if I was a student and I was reading through this, I'm going to focus in on our question here because there is 2 questions. There's 2 parts to it, right? We want to figure out how many seashells will each person get, and the second part is, are there any extra? To answer that question of how many seashells will each person get, what information is important? Well, as you're going through this, you might have underlined 5 days at the beach, but we don't care how long she was there. That's not relevant to this question. I do want to know how many seashells there are. She found 22 seashells. That's going to be important information to answer the question, how many seashells each person gets. But that 36 starfish, also not relevant. She's not giving away the starfish. That's extra information we don't need. So it tells us that's how long she was at the beach. This is how many seashells she found. We don't care how many starfish she finds. It tells us she decides to split her seashells. So she's splitting those 22 seashells between herself and her 4 friends. Now I underlined a couple more things there. I put split in a box because split, that's just another way to say she's sharing her seashells. She's splitting up her seashells. She's dividing her seashells. She's dividing her seashells between herself and her 4 friends. So we know there's 22 seashells, and she's dividing those 22 seashells between how many people? It's tempting to put 4, but it's herself and her 4 friends, which means there's a total of 5 people. So we've got our 22 seashells we're dividing up between the 5 people. That is what we need to find to answer this first question. How many seashells will each person get? Now, once we've got that there, we can go ahead and do the division. How many seashells do you think each person will get? Well, 22 divided by 5, that's one of those problems you can't divide equally. If you grabbed a calculator and typed that in, you're going to notice there's a decimal because it does not divide perfectly. So let's think through what we had seen yesterday in our division notes for what that means. If I gave you 22 divided by 5, the first thing we asked yesterday is how many times 5 goes into 22? Well, if you count up by 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 is too many, so it just goes in 5, 10, 15, 20, 4 times. Now 5 goes into 22 4 times. That gets you up to 20. Well, we've got 22. That means there would be a remainder of 2. 20, and then 21, 22. That's where the 2 is coming from. So we're left with 4 remainder 2. Now think about this for a second. If we were outside of math class and I asked you the question, how many seashells would each person get? Even if you are the best math student in the world, you are not about to say, oh, well, each student or each person gets 4 remainder 2. That's not how you say it, right? What this means is each person would get 4 seashells. Remainder 2 just is answering the second part here. Are there any extra? Remember, we learned yesterday that remainder is that extra amount you have when you divide. If it doesn't divide perfectly and there's something left over, that's your remainder. So to answer that second part, are there any extra? We could say yes, there's an extra 2 seashells. The only reason we would use the word remainder is if we were purely talking about math, but this is outside math class, so you're definitely allowed to say, and there's 2 extra, there's 2 left over. You don't need to use that word remainder. So to answer this question, how many seashells will each person get? We could say each person gets 4. So I could say 4 shells or seashells, and making sure I answered my second part of my question and don't forget about it. Our second part says, are there any extra? I could say, and yes, there are 2 extra. You could say there are 2 extra, there are 2 shells left over, however you want to say it, but something like that. Do not just stop at that 4 remainder 2. It's a story problem, it's a word problem. You got to put it back into words. What does 4 remainder 2 mean? Well, it means this. So these are the 3 examples I had. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys some to try. The first one looks like this. We've got Africa's bookshelves hold 14 books on each shelf. How many shelves will Africa need for her store if she has 462 books? Our second problem is there are 35 students who want to play soccer. They split into 2 teams. How many people are on each team? And our final question is Doors is going on a field trip. Each school bus holds 45 students. They filled 4 buses with students and 12 students drove in their cars. How many total students went on the field trip? Now this one I want to talk about just because I think it leads nicely into this last part we have. So we've got each school bus holds 45 students. So every single bus that goes, 45 people can fit in it. It tells us they fill 4 buses. So I'm gonna stop drawing pictures. I've got 4 buses that go, and each bus has 45 people on it. So there's 45 there, 45 there, 45 there, 45 there. Hopefully you figure it out. It's that same number again and again. We're gonna use multiplication. I would wanna just say 45 students on each of those buses times the 4 buses. And when you do that, you get 180. 180 students went on those buses. But they told us something else. 180 students went on the buses, but they also told us 12 students drove in their cars. And we're trying to find how many total students went on this field trip. Well, 180 went in the buses. We still need to include these 12 students in their cars. So since it's an extra 12 students and we're trying to find the total, I would want to add in that 12 for our final answer of 192 students. So I said this problem leads us nicely into this last part because notice this problem, first of all, had 2 steps in it. And one of the steps was multiplication, but the other one was addition. At this point in the lesson, you have seen word problems that use addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division now. This last part is on a mixture of word problems with all 4 of those operations. After this lesson, it's not going to be broken up into like, oh, these are addition and subtraction, these are multiplication and division. We're going to have all 4 operations to choose from, and we're going to have to decide, does it make sense in this problem for me to add, for me to subtract, multiply, divide? That's what the last part of this lesson is focusing on. So to help us articulate when we're going to do each of these, I've got this part here that says put in your own words. Let's go ahead and just do these first 2. This is a refresher from Unit 1, which is what we finished last week. Time goes by so quickly. Go ahead and answer these 2 questions for me. I know in a word problem we need to add if blank. I know in a word problem we need to subtract if blank. There are a lot of correct answers. Put what makes sense to you. In class, what I usually hear for add is something about total. If it is asking you to find the total of something, that would mean addition, right? With perimeter, we were trying to find the total distance around a shape. You could also write perimeter, by the way. But we were trying to find the total distance around the shape. That's why with perimeter, we were always adding numbers. Another thing I see a lot is if you are putting together something. So I want to put these students over here with these students. We're putting them all together. That same idea of like we're trying to find the total of everyone together. But together, total, words like that are a clue that you're going to want to add things. Now subtraction's like the opposite, right? What I hear a lot in class is people say if the word problem's talking about taking away something, this idea of taking away or maybe like removing something, that's a clue you're going to want to subtract. So if I had 100 students and I don't know, 4 went away on a field trip, I'm taking those 4 students away from my 100 I have for the day. That would be subtraction. I need to subtract them out. Now these are the 2 we've been focusing on this week. Go ahead and try to answer these questions. I know in a word problem we need to multiply if. I know in a word problem we need to divide if. For these, just like above, there's a lot of things you can put. I'm just going to put the same things we said at the beginning of this lesson, right? Multiplication, we have this idea of repeated addition. If you are trying to find the total of a bunch of groups and all those groups are the same size, it's this idea of repeated addition. So if I have 5 tables in this room and each table has 2 students, I could use addition, right? Or I could just say, well, there's 5 groups of 2. Let me multiply. Division, I'm definitely going to put down this idea of equally sharing. So equally sharing or splitting up something is a big clue that you're going to want to use division. So now that we've reviewed these, there are, I believe, 3 problems for you to look at. Here we go. This first one says KG goes to Walmart and spends $24 on food and $17 on clothes. If she gives the cashier a $50 bill, how much money should she get back? Go ahead and try that one now. Well, to figure this out, there's 2 steps to this one. First, for us to know how much money she should get back, we need to know how much money she spends. Well, she spends $24 on food and then the $17 on the clothes. So to find the total she spends, notice I'm using the word total because we're going to add these. So that means the total she spends, when you add these, you get 41. Now, if she pays with a 50 and we're trying to find how much change she should get back, we need to take away the money she's spending from the money she has. Notice I said take away because we're going to be subtracting. When you subtract that $50 she has minus the 41 she spends, that's going to leave you with $9. The second one is Kaylee buys a bag of Skittles for her kids. There are 94 Skittles in the bag. If she has 7 children and wants to share the Skittles fairly between her kids, herself, and her husband, how many Skittles does each person get? Go ahead and try that one now. The tricky part of this one, I think, is what we are sharing, or who I should say we're sharing those Skittles with. There are 94 Skittles. You're sharing, it says sharing fairly. Another way to say that is equally sharing or dividing. So we are dividing those 94 Skittles by who? Well, there are 7 kids, but it says 7 children, herself, and her husband. So she's dividing it between those 7 kids, herself, and her husband. That is 9 people. Now, when you do that, it doesn't divide equally. You end up getting 10 remainder 4. So how many Skittles does each person get? Well, each person gets 10, and there are 4 left over. One last one. Let me clean this up. This last one here says Ippolito picked 65 apples at the orchard and uses 16 apples for each pie he bakes. He wants to make 4 pies. Does he have enough apples? Explain why or why not. All right, and make sure to come back to Edpuzzle to check your answers for all of these questions, the written response ones like the one you just did, because we do give feedback on these and you want to make sure you got a good understanding of this. Thanks so much for watching this lesson. Bye.